"So, how much did your aunt leave you?" Henry asked me bluntly, just moments after we laid her to rest. I couldn't believe he had the nerve to say that, without even a single word of comfort. He must have thought the inheritance was already mine because he saw me with the bank documents. But assuming that was so wrong, especially at such a time. "It's about $1.5 million, I replied softly. $1.5 million? Is that it?" Henry responded, with a smirk that made my skin crawl. "Well, even after taxes, you should have a good amount left." I didn't like his reaction one bit. That sly grin made me uneasy. I didn't know what he was planning, but I had a feeling things wouldn't go the way he expected. The next day, Henry began to set his plan in motion, but his short-sightedness was going to cost him dearly. He just didn't know it yet. "My name is Lisa Monroe. I got married through an arranged setup when I was 20. My husband's name is Henry, and he works at a financial firm. He's 5 years older than me and the eldest son of the Monroe family. However, even though he's considered the eldest, his younger sister, Rachel, left home after college and hasn't been in touch much since. So, Henry was treated like an only child, and was deeply cherished by his parents. Truth be told, I never wanted to marry Henry, but my mother came from a family with a strong business background. I was in no position to go against my parents' wishes, so I married Henry. He couldn't refuse either, as his father was heavily involved in business matters. We didn't marry for love. It was a union of convenience, far from any real happiness. Unfortunately, we couldn't have children. We married young, and it was hard to accept that we couldn't start a family. I hoped that having a child might bring us closer, but even with medical help, it didn't happen. "Hey, barren woman, did you finish the chores?" At first, my in-laws, who treated me well, started calling me barren after a few years. I mean, you should be able to make it happen if you just do what you're supposed to. "It's a waste of money going to doctors," my father-in-law would say, his words cutting deep. But Henry never defended me. He'd just bury his face in a book or take a nap, snoring loudly. When I expressed a desire to work, wanting to make a change, Henry would say, "If you go to work, people will think we're struggling," and wouldn't let me leave the house. Back then it was common for women to stay home after marriage. However, living alone with my mother-in-law was unbearable. Every day was a struggle. I couldn't worry my own parents by telling them, and I couldn't escape because our marriage was a family obligation. Still, I thought I'd be rewarded someday and held on, enduring day after day. But no matter how long I waited, nothing improved. 17 years into our marriage, when I was 37, my father-in-law passed away suddenly. His death revealed that his company had been involved in tax evasion. The penalties drained our assets. Our property was seized, and the company went bankrupt. Though we managed to keep the house, our comfortable lifestyle was gone. I thought it would be difficult for Henry, then 42, to find a new job, but my parents introduced him to a position. Thanks to their connections, he quickly found work. But my mother-in-law became a shell of herself and aged rapidly. For a while, she didn't have the energy to say mean things to me, which was a small relief. But then she had a stroke and needed constant care. At that point, I lost all hope of having a child. I was already 37 and had somewhat resigned myself to the situation, but this marked the final point of no return. Henry naturally left all of his mother's care to me. On his days off, he would relax just like before. "Henry, I wish you'd help with your mother's care sometimes," I gathered my courage to say one day. Even if it was just on his days off, even if it was just one meal, his help would mean the world to me. But Henry frowned and said, "I work all week. Let me rest on my days off." Henry simply didn't understand. I didn't have the luxury of a day off. After Henry's father's company collapsed, my parents became increasingly worried about me. They finally suggested, "Why don't you come back home?" But what would happen to his mother if I left? We had a caretaker come in once a week, but hiring someone full-time was out of the question. Despite being treated poorly, I couldn't bring myself to abandon her. It just wasn't in me. Eventually, Henry started leaving the house early, even on weekends. He said it was uncomfortable to stay home. I heard through the neighbors that he began telling people, "My wife won't even let me relax at home on my days off." He began taking trips alone, and the neighbors knew his mother needed care. Despite knowing this, he still acted as if all the caregiving was left to me, showing he didn't care about how others perceived him. It was heartbreaking to see his mother, who adored Henry, being ignored by him once she became ill. Sometimes she would say, "It's because you're here that Henry won't come," but when I replied, "Should I leave then?" she would quickly go silent. This continued for another 15 years, and the long caregiving period finally ended when my mother-in-law passed away, reuniting with her husband. I was about to turn 52. I had no love left for Henry. But I had come to terms with many things. Leaving didn't seem possible, and I figured I would spend the rest of my life in this house. Henry was diligent at work, and this was recognized. Even after reaching retirement age, he was asked to stay on as a senior advisor. This allowed me to live somewhat comfortably. We were never a close couple, but I'm grateful for this stability. Our marriage wasn't ideal, but Henry never tried to force me out. He probably thinks it's too late for that now. He still prefers being out of the house on weekends, so I've come to enjoy my time alone. I've even taken up painting as a hobby. I've made friends at this age and finally have days I can enjoy. But this seems to have irked Henry. "You're out having fun while I'm working," he said, and one day he even destroyed one of my canvases. I used it for my art class, and Henry slashed it with a knife. "What are you doing?" I cried out in disbelief. "Don't waste time on useless hobbies. Just do the housework," he said coldly. My painting materials and supplies were ruined. I was furious. I thought it was too late for change, but I realized I still had a long life ahead. The word divorce crossed my mind, but just as I was considering it, another blow came my way. My parents both passed away suddenly. My father died from a heart attack, and a month after his funeral, my mother fell ill and followed him. It all happened so quickly, and I was left reeling with grief. My brother, David, had already taken over my father's business, and with so many people at both funerals, I ended up bedridden for about a week. I was mentally and emotionally exhausted. My friends from art class were kind enough to check on me, but Henry sneered, saying, "How long are you going to lay around?" I was tired after my mom's funeral too, but I didn't sleep all day. Must be nice to be lazy. His words might have had some truth, but as a husband, they were incredibly hurtful. The next day, I forced myself out of bed and returned to my daily routine. I no longer had the luxury to enjoy my hobbies. It was a bare-bones existence. But Henry seemed satisfied, not caring about my feelings. Then, sometime after my mother's funeral, I remembered the payment to the funeral home was due, so I checked the bank account. David was swamped with work, so I had promised to handle the payment. But Henry noticed me with the bank documents and walked over with a sly smile. "So, how much was your mother's inheritance?" I was stunned by his words. He asked this right after my mother's funeral, without a hint of concern for me. He must have assumed the inheritance was already deposited since he saw me checking the account. But thinking that was so wrong on many levels, I replied coolly, "About $1.5 million. $1.5 million? Is that all?" he said with that same unpleasant grin. "Well, after taxes, there should still be a decent amount." What a terrible grin. I didn't know what Henry was scheming, but I knew it wouldn't go his way. Without saying anything further, I quietly put the bank book away. Finally realizing the tension, Henry added, "Well, you've had it rough. You should get some rest tonight." It was unusual for Henry to say something kind, maybe because he felt awkward. Far from comforting me, it made me feel even worse. I didn't want to see his face anymore, so I went to bed early. However, something unexpected happened. The next day after breakfast, Henry left for work as usual. But then I received a call saying he hadn't shown up at the office. I was shocked because he had never missed work before. Worried he might have been in an accident, I called his phone repeatedly, but there was no answer. As I paced around, I entered the living room and noticed something on the table. It was a divorce form, already signed by Henry. The moment I saw it, I thought, this can't be happening, and checked where I had kept the bank book. As I suspected, it was gone. Incredible, I muttered to myself. This wasn't an accident. Henry had disappeared intentionally. I had suspected something was off that morning. By taking the bank book, he must be planning to start a new life without me. Henry hadn't forced me out before because he was waiting for my parents' inheritance. The missing bank book was all the proof I needed. Even with this realization, I stayed calm. There was no reason to panic. I carefully filled out my part of the divorce form and took it to the city office. Henry had dug his own grave, and I decided he needed to understand that it was too late for regrets. I contacted Henry's workplace and told them, I can't reach him either, but it doesn't seem like an accident. I'll inform you if I hear anything. Sorry for the inconvenience. The office said they would treat it as a personal day and hoped he was okay. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of envy at his supportive workplace. After all, it was a job he got through my parents' connections. I hoped he'd take his work seriously. But now he was out of my life for good. I successfully submitted the divorce papers. After all I had been through, it was surprising how easily I became free. I wondered if my life could have been different if I had divorced earlier. As I packed up my belongings, my phone rang. It was Henry, who had ignored my calls before. I knew what he would say, so I didn't answer. The phone kept ringing, again and again. Eventually, even the landline started ringing. It was probably Henry, and it was so annoying that I reluctantly answered. "Hello?" I said calmly. Sure enough, Henry's panicked voice came through. "Yes, I was told you hadn't shown up for work. You need to contact them immediately." "That's not important right now," Henry interrupted, shouting. "I can't access the money." Hearing his voice, I couldn't help but laugh. So, he finally noticed, I thought. He must have stolen the bank book in a hurry, without thinking it through. "My ID, you destroyed it, remember?" I said, chuckling. "What? No. Don't you remember it was in the bag with my art supplies?" I replied, still laughing. Henry sounded frantic. "Then this ID? Isn't it expired?" he stammered. "I wouldn't know. After your mother passed, I asked you to handle the paperwork several times. I even went to the bank, but they told me it couldn't be processed because I wasn't the legal heir. So, the bank book has been sitting there with just a few dollars left." "Don't play games! You should have taken care of all this," Henry shouted. "Well, that's your responsibility, not mine. You said you'd handle it eventually, so don't blame me now." "Then what am I supposed to do with this bank book?" he asked, frustrated. "Whether to do something or not? Unless you complete the paperwork, there's nothing that can be done about it." As I spoke, Henry kept complaining, but I didn't feel like responding anymore and fell silent. Henry, impatient as always, must have gone back to the bank to explain the situation. "I accidentally destroyed the ID. Can't anything be done? Maybe by proxy? I'm on the phone with my wife right now," he said. Put it on speaker, and I heard the bank teller's concerned voice as well. "Larry, what are you talking about? You know you can't do anything like that as a stranger," I said sharply. "Oh, and by the way, the divorce papers were just processed. Thanks for the heads up. Bye." I hung up the phone, smiling. I'm sure the teller heard every word I said. By now, Henry must be either pale with shock or red with rage. Just imagining it made me chuckle. I knew I had to leave the house before he returned. With that thought, I quickly packed my things and left. My destination was my family's old home, which was empty since my parents passed away. I had inherited it as well. My mother's assets, accumulated through years of hard work, amounted to $12 million. However, I chose to inherit just enough to live comfortably, about $1.5 million. The rest was tied up in the family home, my mother's vintage clothing collection, and my father's rare book collection. These items, if appraised, would be worth a fortune. My brother David agreed to this arrangement, as he had his own family and was content with his portion of the inheritance. We settled everything amicably. After arriving at the family home, I informed David that I had divorced Henry and would be living there. He said, "If you're staying, it won't be empty," which is a relief. "But are you sure about divorcing Henry, Lisa?" "Yes," I replied firmly. "We didn't have children, and both of our parents are gone. If we both want a divorce, it's the best choice. I want to start over, and I have no regrets." David was concerned about me living alone, but life as Henry's servant was no longer an option. Besides, spending my final days in the house where I had so many fond memories, even if alone, would bring me peace. Henry kept calling, but he never thought to find me at the family home, so he never came by. That day, I enjoyed the quiet solitude, finally feeling a deep sense of relief. The next day, I gathered the strength to go to the bank. The bank book was with Henry, and retrieving it would be tricky. I decided to go early in the morning, assuming Henry would still be asleep. When I returned home, the smell of alcohol hit me as soon as I opened the door. Disgusted, I entered the living room and saw empty bottles scattered everywhere. The bank book was torn and thrown on the table. This is awful. Tearing up someone's bank book like this is just wrong, no matter how angry you are. I collected the pieces, put them in my bag, grabbed a few clothes, and returned to the family home. Then I headed to the bank. As I approached the entrance, I heard someone call my name. "Lisa!" It was Henry. He had been waiting for me. "I noticed the bank book was gone, so I figured you'd come here," he said. "Whether I come here or not is none of your business," I replied coldly. "Don't say that. We've been together for so long." Even though the divorce was final, he still tried to play the victim. I ignored him and entered the bank. Henry kept trying to talk to me, but I stood firm. That's when it happened. "Isn't that Lisa?" someone called out. "David, why are you here?" It was my brother, David. Both Henry and I were surprised to see him. David and I didn't see each other often, except for major family events. It had been about 40 years since I married Henry, and this was probably the third time he'd seen David. David had distanced himself from the family, but our parents, concerned about their reputation, had insisted he at least show up for significant events. Since we had last seen each other at my mother-in-law's funeral a few years ago, he probably recognized us. "Ah, I'm here to take care of Mom's estate. Thought I'd check the balance and then let you know," David said. Henry's eyes lit up with hope. I was surprised, too. I thought the account had only a few dollars left, but according to David, there were also some old investment accounts and safety deposit boxes that had been overlooked. David had learned about them from our father before he passed. He was told, "If anything happens, you take care of it." But his busy schedule had delayed things until now. David looked apologetically at me and Henry. "There was a letter in the safety deposit box, along with some old jewelry. Mom said everything should go to you, Lisa," David said. "What?" I was stunned, but Henry was even more shocked. David pulled out a letter from the documents he had with him. I recognized the stationery. It was the kind my mother used. The letter clearly stated that all the jewelry and other assets should go to me, her daughter, Lisa. I could imagine my mother writing it carefully. I remembered asking her if she needed anything, but she had simply said, "No, it's all taken care of." Maybe she had planned this all along. I covered my mouth in surprise. "Lisa, you've handled everything on your own, right?" David said. Despite the harsh words my mother had sometimes spoken, she must have felt sorry and wanted me to handle her estate. She knew that if she told Henry, he'd likely try to keep it quiet. Beside me, Henry's face turned red with anger, and he started trembling. "Well, I never planned on inheriting anything, but as the legal heir, I felt responsible. It's just a matter of changing the name to Lisa, so that shouldn't be a problem, right, Henry?" David said this casually, unaware of the divorce. Later, I was called to the bank counter. Henry, now without purpose, just sat in the lobby, too stunned to act. That day, I completed the necessary paperwork for the funeral expenses and had the bank book reissued. "I'll be in touch, Lisa. Take care," David said, leaving Henry and me behind. I returned home safely. David contacted me later, explaining that Henry had protested, saying, "That letter isn't valid." But David persuaded him, saying, "We should respect Mom's wishes." However, unable to satisfy Henry, David consulted a lawyer. Although the letter wasn't an official will, the lawyer advised that settling things amicably would be better than going to court. Henry eventually agreed to let me have the house. The investments weren't worth much, and Henry reluctantly gave up on those and the jewelry. So I formally received my mother's estate. "If Lisa gets Mom's estate, I should get something from her too, right?" Henry argued. But the lawyer dismissed it as a separate issue. It was embarrassing, even for Henry. Henry couldn't accept it and eventually tracked me down at the family home, showing up at the door. "I was wrong. Let's start over," he begged, realizing he couldn't get anything. He knelt at the doorstep, pleading for reconciliation. "Start over? There was never any love between us, so what's there to start over?" I said firmly. For the first time, I felt free to express my true feelings. Henry fell silent, possibly regretting his actions for the first time. I couldn't help but smile. "At least you still have the house, right? Have you contacted your workplace? If you're so desperate for money, you'd better work hard and not lose your job," I said, closing the door behind me. It was finally over. The bank book held the assets left by our mothers, and with this, I could live comfortably from now on. Henry, however, continued to miss work, eventually leading to his dismissal. I had warned him. Without even his work to fall back on, what did he have left? Perhaps his dedication to work was more about preserving his dignity. Now, with no one to show off to and no easy money, he must feel he has lost his purpose in life. Although I had spent many years with him, I had no intention of helping him now. "I'm truly sorry for all the trouble, Lisa. It's really unfortunate," David said. He was the only one who apologized, and assured me I didn't need to worry about Henry anymore. David had recognized the family's issues early on and left home, likely living a happier life without the burdens of our past. Henry became reclusive, but at his age, he could probably live on his pension. Wanting to start over showed some courage on his part, but he should try doing that on his own. I began attending painting classes again, and my friends were thrilled to see me return. I hadn't realized how much joy I could find in spending time on something I loved. At the painting class, I even met someone special. Though I had sworn off marriage, finding someone who genuinely cared for me felt like a form of happiness. Instead of being alone forever, maybe embracing a new chapter in my life was the right path. It might feel like it's too late, but just like with the divorce, it's never too late. As long as you're alive, there's always a chance to find happiness, no matter your age. I truly believe that.